Stray dog guards injured boy all night. The outcome will stun everyone. How will this story unfold? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. The night was colder than usual, a harsh wind sweeping through the empty fields and rattling the trees like skeletal fingers. The moon, hidden behind heavy storm clouds, cast only a faint, eerie glow over the deserted countryside. The silence was almost absolute, save for the occasional rustling of leaves and the distant call of an owl. It was a night that swallowed sound, making the world feel more isolated than ever. Amidst the darkness, a small figure lay motionless on the damp earth near the banks of a quiet river. A boy, no older than 8, his clothes tattered and caked with mud, his tiny frame shivering against the cruel bite of the night air. His face, streaked with dirt and dried tears, bore a large gash above his brow, and his breathing was shallow, labored. His small hand clutched a half-worn shoe, his own, its laces frayed, as if he had tried to hold onto something familiar in a world that had abandoned him. Beside him, standing guard, was a lone stray dog. Its fur was matted, a patchwork of dirt and old scars, yet its eyes burned with an unwavering sense of loyalty. The dog had found the boy hours ago, drawn to the scent of blood and the faint, uneven rise and fall of his chest. At first, it had sniffed cautiously, nudging the child's arm with its wet nose, expecting movement. When the boy did not stir, the dog circled him, whining softly, unsure of what to do. But something in the boy's fragile form, in the way his fingers twitched weakly as though reaching for help in his unconscious state, struck a chord deep within the animal's soul. The dog understood abandonment. It knew what it meant to be left behind, to wander alone with no home, no name, no one to care if you lived or died. It had been a survivor all its life, scraping by on discarded scraps and evading the cruel hands of strangers. Yet, in that moment, the dog made a decision: this child would not be alone. Not tonight. The dog curled its body around the boy, pressing its warm fur against his chilled skin, acting as a shield against the cold. It licked the wound on his forehead, trying in vain to clean the dried blood. The boy whimpered in his sleep, shifting slightly, but did not wake. The dog's ears perked up at the sound, hopeful. But when the child remained unconscious, it lowered its head and let out a small, mournful whine. The night stretched on, long and merciless. The dog remained vigilant, its eyes scanning the darkness, ears twitching at every distant sound. It was not just the cold that threatened the boy. The night was full of dangers. Wild animals roamed the outskirts of the woods. Coyotes, hungry and bold enough to creep toward civilization, always on the hunt for easy prey. There were humans, too, not all of them kind. The dog had learned that not every outstretched hand was friendly, that some were quick to throw stones, to kick, to chase away anything deemed worthless. At one point, the dog's ears perked at the sound of something moving in the underbrush. A low growl rumbled in its throat as it stood, muscles tense, ready to fight if needed. From the shadows, a pair of glowing eyes stared back. Another dog, lean and scarred, a scavenger searching for food. The stray bared its teeth, lips curling into a snarl, a warning. The other dog hesitated, its eyes flicking between the unconscious boy and the stray, weighing its chances. But the growl deepened, the stance unwavering. The message was clear: this child is mine to protect. After a tense moment, the other dog slunk back into the darkness, disappearing into the night. The stray settled once more beside the boy, pressing its nose against his hand. It was cold, too cold. The child's breathing was slow, uneven. He needed warmth. The dog moved closer, its body covering as much of the boy as possible, trying to will its own heat into him. It let out small, short whines, nudging him, desperate for a response. Then, at long last, a weak sound escaped the boy's lips, a barely audible whisper, a ghost of a breath. The dog's tail thumped once, eager, hopeful. The boy's fingers twitched against the fur, a feeble attempt at movement. His eyelids fluttered, struggling against exhaustion. The dog let out an encouraging whimper, licking his cheek. The boy's eyes opened just a sliver, unfocused, heavy with sleep and pain. His lips parted, his voice cracked and weak. "D-dog," he murmured, barely a sound. The stray whined again, nuzzling against his face. The boy's fingers grasped at the fur weakly, as if seeking comfort. His eyes, though unfocused, filled with something fragile. Relief, perhaps, or gratitude. Then, just as quickly as he had woken, his eyelids drooped once more, his body succumbing to exhaustion. But he was still alive. The dog did not move from its spot, not even as the sky began to lighten, the first rays of dawn creeping over the horizon. It did not leave the boy's side when the distant hum of an approaching vehicle broke the early morning silence, nor when voices, urgent and frantic, called out from the road. It did not flinch as footsteps pounded against the ground, rushing toward them. A woman's gasp shattered the stillness. "Oh my God! Over here! We found him!" More footsteps, more voices, hands reaching, lifting, checking for a pulse. The boy was scooped into a woman's arms, his head resting limply against her shoulder. The dog tensed, ears back, ready to fight, to defend the child. But the woman's touch was gentle, her voice filled with emotion. "He's alive. He's alive," she whispered, as if in disbelief. The dog watched as they carried him away, its heart pounding. The boy's fingers, even in his unconscious state, still clutched at the dog's fur, reluctant to let go. And as they loaded him into the ambulance, as the doors shut and the sirens wailed, the dog did something it had never done before. Chased after them. Paws pounded against the pavement, desperate, unwilling to be left behind. The vehicle was too fast, but the dog ran anyway, its legs burning, its breath coming in short, frantic pants. It ran because it had to, because for the first time in its life it had found something worth holding on to, something worth protecting, and it would not let go. The ambulance raced down the winding road, sirens blaring through the still morning air. Inside, the paramedics worked quickly, checking the boy's vitals, wrapping his wounds, and stabilizing his temperature. His small body was still too cold, his breathing shallow, but he was alive. That was all that mattered for now. The dog, however, did not stop running. It chased after the vehicle, its paws slamming against the pavement, its muscles aching, but it refused to let the boy out of its sight. The asphalt burned under the early morning sun, and every step felt heavier than the last, but the dog pressed on. Every time its legs threatened to give out, it thought of the boy, his fragile form, his desperate grip on its fur, the way his voice had cracked as he whispered, "Dog." That was all the encouragement it needed to keep going. But the ambulance was too fast. Slowly, the distance between them grew wider. The dog barked, whined, pleaded for the vehicle to stop, but the sound was swallowed by the rushing wind. Its legs wobbled, exhaustion creeping in, and with one final burst of energy, the stray leaped onto the road, only to collapse. It lay there, panting, heart hammering against its ribs, as the ambulance disappeared into the distance. For the first time in its life, the dog felt utterly defeated. The boy was gone. It had lost him. A deep, gut-wrenching whimper escaped its throat as it lay sprawled on the pavement, too weak to move. Its body ached, its vision blurred, and the heat of the rising sun pressed down on its back. But even in its exhaustion, the dog did not close its eyes, kept staring down the road, waiting, hoping. Minutes passed, then an hour. The stray remained there, watching, ears twitching at every distant sound, at every passing vehicle. Then a noise. The dog's ears perked. It was faint, but unmistakable, the sound of a car slowing down. Tires crunched against gravel. A door opened. Footsteps approached. The dog lifted its head weakly, and through its hazy vision, it saw a woman standing before it. She crouched down, her voice soft and hesitant. "You were chasing after the ambulance, weren't you?" The dog blinked sluggishly, barely able to process her words. "I saw you running. You wouldn't stop," the woman continued, reaching out a cautious hand. "You're trying to find that boy, aren't you?" At the mention of the child, the dog forced itself to move. It struggled to its paws, legs trembling beneath its weight. Took a step forward, then collapsed again. The woman gasped. "Oh, you poor thing," she murmured, gently running her fingers through the dog's matted fur. She could feel the heat radiating off its body, the exhaustion in its muscles. This dog had pushed itself beyond its limits. A heavy sigh left her lips as she looked back toward the road. She knew where the ambulance was heading. There was only one hospital nearby. And this dog, it wasn't just any stray. It had protected that boy. She couldn't leave it behind. Gently, she scooped the dog into her arms. It was heavier than it looked, but she cradled it against her chest, carrying it to her car. The dog, too weak to resist, let out a quiet sigh as its body relaxed in her warmth. It didn't understand where it was going, but for the first time in its life, it allowed itself to trust. The car ride was short, but for the dog, it felt like an eternity. The woman drove with urgency, her hands tight on the steering wheel, her foot pressing harder on the gas. She didn't know why she was doing this, why she was going out of her way for an animal she had never met. But something deep inside her knew that this dog had a purpose. It had saved that boy, and it deserved to see him again. The hospital parking lot was nearly full when she arrived. Nurses and doctors rushed in and out of the building, a flurry of motion and urgent voices. The woman parked hastily, stepping out with the dog in her arms. She pushed through the entrance, the automatic doors sliding open with a soft hiss. A nurse at the front desk turned to her, eyebrows raising in surprise. "Ma'am, are you—" "The boy," the woman interrupted, slightly breathless. "The one they brought in earlier. The lost child. Where is he?" The nurse blinked in confusion, then hesitated. I can't disclose patient information." The woman gestured to the dog in her arms, voice laced with desperation. "This dog saved him. It was with him all night, chased after the ambulance. It didn't stop running." The nurse's eyes widened, glancing down at the exhausted animal. She had heard about the boy, about how he had been found unconscious near the river, barely alive. The idea that a dog had been his only guardian through the night made her chest tighten. "Please," the woman pleaded, "just let it see him, just for a moment." The nurse hesitated, glancing toward the hallway. The hospital had rules, protocols. But then she looked at the dog, at the way it barely clung to consciousness, at the way its ears perked whenever someone mentioned the boy. Finally, she exhaled. "Wait here." Minutes later, the woman was led through the quiet halls of the hospital, past beeping monitors and hushed voices. They reached a small room, where a young boy lay motionless on a hospital bed. His forehead was wrapped in bandages, and dripping fluid into his tiny arm. Beside him, a nurse was adjusting the monitors, ensuring his vitals remained stable. The dog, sensing something familiar, stirred weakly in the woman's arms. The nurse noticed the movement and turned, eyes widening. "Is that?" The woman nodded. "It's his dog. It never left him." The nurse swallowed hard, then stepped aside. "Bring it closer." The woman approached the bed, lowering the dog onto the mattress beside the boy. It took a moment, but as soon as its paws touched the sheets, the dog found its strength. It crawled forward, nudging its nose against the boy's hand, letting out a soft whimper. The boy didn't move. The dog tried again, licking his fingers. Then a twitch. The room fell silent as the boy's fingers curled, ever so slightly, around the dog's fur. His breathing hitched, his head shifting faintly on the pillow. Then, with great effort, his eyelids fluttered open. For a long moment, he simply stared, dazed, disoriented. Then, his gaze landed on the dog. His lips parted. "Dog," a single tear slipped down the woman's cheek. The nurse let out a soft gasp, her hand covering her mouth. The dog, tail thumping weakly against the bed, let out a joyful whimper. The boy's fingers, though frail, tightened around its fur. His lips curved into the faintest smile. Against all odds, he had woken up. And the first thing he saw was the one who had never left his side. The nurses moved quickly, calling the doctors to check the boy's condition. The room buzzed with urgency, but the boy's tired eyes remained locked on the dog beside him. The frail grip he had on the dog's fur didn't loosen, as if he feared it would disappear if he let go. The dog, equally exhausted, nestled its head onto the boy's arm, letting out a content sigh. A doctor entered, flipping through a chart before leaning down to examine the child. "Well, this is a surprise," he murmured. His fingers gently pressed against the boy's wrist, checking his pulse, before shifting to examine his pupils. His body temperature has stabilized. His heart rate is improving. He was unconscious for almost 10 hours, but he's responding now. The nurse beside him shook her head in amazement. "It's the dog. It was with him all night. It must have kept him warm." The doctor looked at the woman who had brought the dog in. "You said this dog chased after the ambulance?" She nodded. "It ran until it collapsed." The doctor exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "This animal saved his life." The boy's mother, who had been standing frozen near the bed, finally stepped forward, tears slipping down her cheeks. She looked at her son, her voice trembling. "Caleb." The boy turned his head toward her, his small face pale, his lips dry. "Mom." His voice was barely above a whisper. She let out a broken sob, covering her mouth before leaning over him, pressing her forehead against his. "Oh, my baby. I thought I lost you." The boy gave her a weak smile. "Dog saved me." His mother pulled back, wiping her tears. She turned toward the animal still resting beside him, her gaze filled with something beyond gratitude, awe. This stray, this nameless dog, had done something extraordinary. She reached out, stroking its fur gently. "Thank you," she whispered. The dog's ears perked slightly at her touch, but it didn't move. It was still too exhausted, its energy drained after pushing itself to the brink for the child. But it understood. Somehow it knew. The doctor cleared his throat. "He's going to need rest, but this is nothing short of a miracle." He turned to the mother. "Your son was on the brink of hypothermia. If this dog hadn't been with him, he wouldn't have made it through the night." Tears welled up in her eyes again as she looked between her son and the dog. "Then he stays with us," she said, her voice firm. The woman who had rescued the dog smiled. "I don't think he'd want to be anywhere else." The nurse knelt beside the bed, scratching gently behind the dog's ears. "We'll need to check him, too. He looks exhausted. We have a vet that works with the hospital for therapy animals. Maybe they can help." The mother nodded. "Whatever he needs. He's family now." The boy's fingers curled more securely into the dog's fur. His breathing, though still weak, was steady. The steady beeping of the monitor filled the room, a sound of reassurance. And for the first time since the nightmare began, everything felt right. The following days were filled with recovery. Caleb remained in the hospital under close observation, his body regaining its strength little by little. But no matter what, the dog never left his side. At first, the hospital staff was hesitant about allowing an animal in the room, but as word spread about what had happened, about how the stray had protected the boy all night, how it had chased after the ambulance, how it had collapsed from sheer exhaustion, everyone softened. By the third day, hospital staff brought in a proper bed for the dog, setting it up beside Caleb's. By the fourth day, visitors came just to see the pair, the boy who survived against all odds, and the dog who had refused to leave him. News reporters even showed up, wanting to cover the story, but Caleb's mother refused interviews. This wasn't just a story to her. This was family. On the fifth day, a veterinarian arrived, carefully examining the dog. "He's still tired, but he'll be okay. Just needs food, water, and rest." She smiled at the mother. "You're really keeping him?" The mother looked at her son, who was now sitting up in bed, one hand resting on the dog's back. His eyes were brighter, his cheeks less pale. She didn't hesitate. "Of course. He belongs with us." The veterinarian chuckled. "Then I'd say he needs a name." Caleb, who had been quietly listening, perked up. He turned to the dog beside him, thinking for a moment. Then, with a small smile, he whispered, "Hero." The dog's ears twitched. Caleb's mother smiled. Hero, she repeated. I think that's perfect. The name stuck. From that day forward, Hero was no longer just a stray. He was home. A week had passed, and Caleb was finally well enough to leave the hospital. The morning air was crisp as his mother wheeled him toward the exit. His small frame still weak from his ordeal, but he wasn't alone. Hero trotted beside him, his tail swishing gently as if he knew this was the beginning of something new. Caleb reached out, running his fingers through the dog's fur. Are we really taking him home? He asked, his voice still a little hoarse from days of recovery. His mother smiled down at him. Of course, sweetheart. He saved you. He's part of our family now. Caleb's small fingers curled into Hero's fur. I knew he would come for me, he whispered. His mother bent down, brushing back his hair. You knew? Caleb nodded, his tired eyes meeting hers. That night, when I was alone, I thought no one would find me. But then I heard him. I don't know how, but I just knew he was coming. His mother felt a lump in her throat. The idea that her son had placed his faith in a stray dog, a dog who had risked everything for him, made her chest tighten. She pressed a kiss to his forehead. He's your guardian now, she whispered. Caleb grinned, looking at Hero. Yeah, he is. Hero wagged his tail as if he understood. As they stepped outside, the sun warmed their faces, and Caleb's mother took a deep breath, relieved to finally be taking her son home. But as she did, she noticed something surprising, a crowd. At least a dozen people were gathered near the hospital entrance. Reporters, hospital staff, even strangers who had heard about what had happened. There they are, someone called out. Caleb blinked in confusion as cameras flashed and voices murmured. He turned to his mother, wide-eyed. What's going on? His mother gave a small chuckle. You and Hero are famous, sweetheart. A woman stepped forward, a reporter holding a microphone. Caleb, she said gently, kneeling in front of him. You don't have to talk if you don't want to, but everyone here wants to know how you're doing. Caleb hesitated, glancing at his mother for reassurance. She nodded encouragingly. I'm okay, he said quietly, his hand never leaving Hero's fur. The reporter smiled. And Hero? How is he? Caleb's face softened as he looked at his dog. He's a hero, he said simply. He saved me. The reporter chuckled. That's what everyone's been saying. You know, a lot of people are calling him the guardian dog now. Caleb grinned. He's my guardian. The cameras flashed again, but Caleb ignored them. He didn't care about being famous. He just wanted to go home with Hero. His mother gave the reporter a polite smile before guiding Caleb's wheelchair through the crowd. People whispered words of admiration as they passed. That dog never left his side. I heard he ran after the ambulance for miles. They said if it weren't for him, the boy wouldn't have made it. Caleb didn't say anything, but he held Hero a little closer. When they finally reached the car, Caleb's mother opened the back door, and Hero jumped in without hesitation. Caleb let out a small giggle. Guess he knows he belongs here. His mother laughed. I think he's known that for a while. As they drove home, Caleb leaned against the window, watching the trees blur past. Hero rested his head in Caleb's lap, his eyes drooping in contentment. And for the first time in a long time, everything felt safe. The next few days were filled with adjustments. Hero, once a stray, had to learn what it meant to be part of a family. He had never known the warmth of a home, the comfort of a bed, the feeling of belonging. But he learned quickly. The first night, he refused to sleep anywhere but beside Caleb's bed. The second day, he followed Caleb everywhere, even sitting by the bathtub while the boy took a bath. By the third day, it was clear Hero wasn't just a pet. He was Caleb's shadow. Caleb's mother couldn't help but smile at the bond between them. Wherever Caleb went, Hero followed. When Caleb sat outside, Hero lay beside him. When Caleb ate, Hero sat at his feet, tail wagging. One evening, Caleb's mother found them in the backyard. Caleb lying in the grass, his small hand resting on Hero's back. The dog was alert but relaxed, as if keeping watch over the boy even in sleep. She stepped forward, brushing a strand of hair from Caleb's face. You really love him, don't you? Caleb nodded. Yeah. He looked up at her, his eyes serious. Mom, he saved my life. I think he was meant to find me. His mother's chest tightened. She knelt beside them, running her fingers through Hero's fur. Maybe you were meant to find each other, she whispered. Caleb smiled, curling closer to his dog. Hero let out a soft sigh, content. And in that quiet moment, under the evening sky, everything felt right. The days turned into weeks, and Hero became more than just Caleb's protector. He became his best friend. Wherever Caleb went, Hero was by his side. Whether it was sitting on the porch, playing in the backyard, or lying in bed reading a book, Hero was always there, watching over him with unwavering loyalty. But one day, something unexpected happened. It was a Saturday morning, and Caleb's mother had just finished making breakfast. The smell of pancakes filled the air, and Caleb sat at the table, waiting for his plate. Hero was at his usual spot beside him, his tail thumping against the floor. But just as his mother placed the plate in front of him, Hero's ears perked up. His body tensed, and his nose twitched as if he had caught an unfamiliar scent. Caleb noticed immediately. Hero, the dog didn't respond. Instead, he got up suddenly, his stance alert. He let out a low growl, not aggressive but cautious. Caleb's mother frowned. What is it, boy? Hero took a step toward the front door, his ears twitching as he listened. Then came the knock. 3 firm taps against the door. Caleb's mother wiped her hands on a dish towel and walked to the entrance. Who could that be this early? She murmured, unlocking the door. When she opened it, a tall man stood there, dressed in a uniform. A police officer. Caleb froze. His heart skipped a beat. Hero let out another low growl but stayed by Caleb's side. The officer cleared his throat, his gaze shifting between Caleb's mother and Hero. Good morning, ma'am. I'm Officer Reynolds. I was hoping to speak with you and your son. Caleb's mother hesitated. Is something wrong? Officer Reynolds shook his head. No, nothing bad. Actually, quite the opposite. It's about Hero. Caleb exchanged a glance with his mother. The officer continued, his voice calm. We've been investigating Hero's story since the night of the rescue. Turns out, this dog wasn't just any stray. Caleb's eyes widened. What do you mean? Officer Reynolds reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, folded paper. A few weeks ago, a family reported their dog missing. They had been searching everywhere for him. When we ran a scan, we found out Hero had a microchip. Caleb's heart sank. He gripped Hero's fur, suddenly afraid. You mean, he belongs to someone else? The officer sighed. Technically, yes. But here's the thing. The family who lost him, they're not in town anymore. They moved out of state. And when we contacted them, they said that if Hero had found a new home, they wouldn't take him away. They just wanted to know that he was safe. Caleb's mother let out a breath. So, what does that mean? Officer Reynolds smiled. It means Hero is yours if you want him. The relief that washed over Caleb was instant. He threw his arms around Hero's neck, burying his face in the dog's fur. He's already mine, he whispered. Hero licked his cheek as if to agree. The officer chuckled. Well then, I guess that settles it. Caleb's mother smiled warmly. Thank you, officer. This means the world to him. The officer nodded. It's the least I could do. Hero's story has touched a lot of people. You two have something special. As he left, Caleb hugged Hero again. You're really staying, he whispered. Hero wagged his tail, his eyes filled with love. And just like that, Hero was officially part of the family. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Caleb and Hero were inseparable, and the once stray dog now had a forever home. But Hero was more than just a pet. He had become somewhat of a local legend. Everywhere they went, people recognized him. They stopped Caleb on the street, wanting to pet the guardian dog. Some even took pictures with him, and soon Hero's story spread even further. One afternoon, as Caleb and Hero were walking home from school, a woman approached them. She was holding a camera and had a friendly smile. Excuse me, she said gently. Are you Caleb? Caleb hesitated, holding Hero's leash a little tighter. Yes, The woman beamed. I'm from the local news station. We were wondering if you'd be interested in doing a short interview about Hiro. People love his story, and we'd love to share more about what he's like now. Caleb looked at his mother, unsure. She placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. It's up to you, sweetheart. Caleb glanced down at Hiro, who looked up at him expectantly. After a moment, he nodded. Okay. The woman's smile widened. Great. We'll set up a time this weekend. Thank you, Caleb. As she walked away, Caleb let out a breath. Hiro nudged his hand, as if sensing his nerves. Caleb smiled. Guess we're really famous now, huh? Hiro barked softly, his tail wagging. And as they continued their walk home, Caleb realized something. Hiro had once been astray, alone in the world. But now he had a purpose. He wasn't just a dog. He was a hero, and he always would be. The weekend arrived faster than Caleb expected, and with it, the excitement of Hiro's television debut. The local news crew arrived at their home in the afternoon, setting up cameras on the front porch where Caleb and Hiro often sat together. Caleb sat cross-legged on the steps, Hiro curled up beside him, his head resting comfortably on Caleb's lap. A few feet away, the reporter adjusted her microphone before giving Caleb a reassuring smile. All right, Caleb, she said, whenever you're ready, just answer naturally. We just want to hear about you and Hiro. Caleb nodded, his fingers absent-mindedly running through Hiro's fur. The cameraman gave a signal and the reporter began. Caleb, can you tell us about the night you met Hiro? Caleb took a deep breath, thinking back to that terrifying storm. I got lost in the woods. I was scared and hurt, and then, out of nowhere, Hiro appeared. He stayed with me the whole night, kept me warm, and made sure I was okay. He saved my life. The reporter smiled. That's incredible. Did you ever expect he would become part of your family? Caleb shook his head, a small smile tugging at his lips. No, but I hoped. When they told me he belonged to someone else, I was afraid I'd lose him. But then, the people who lost him said he could stay. That was the best day ever. Hiro wagged his tail as if agreeing, making the crew chuckle. The reporter continued, Hiro's story has inspired so many people. What would you say makes him special? Caleb looked down at Hiro, his heart full. Everything. He's brave, smart, and he loves me. I don't know how, but he just knows when I'm sad, or nervous, or when I need him. He's my best friend. The cameraman zoomed in on Hiro's expressive eyes, capturing the quiet devotion between boy and dog. The interview wrapped up soon after, and the news crew thanked Caleb and his mother for their time. As they packed up their equipment, the reporter crouched down, scratching Hiro behind the ears. You really are a hero, aren't you, boy? Hiro gave her a happy lick in response. That night, the news segment aired, and Caleb watched it with wide eyes. Seeing himself on television felt surreal, but more than anything, he loved seeing Hiro's face on the screen. The response was overwhelming. People from all over town recognized Hiro, stopping to greet him during their walks. Strangers left gifts, treats, toys, even letters about how Hiro's story had touched them. Caleb read each one aloud to Hiro. One letter stood out more than the rest. It came from a young girl named Emma, who had been struggling with anxiety. I get scared a lot, she wrote, but when I heard about Hiro staying with you when you were lost, it made me feel better. It made me believe that good things can happen. Even when you're scared, Caleb wiped at his eyes. He looked at Hiro and whispered, You're helping people, buddy. Hiro gave a small, understanding bark. Weeks passed, and life continued with its newfound normalcy. But then, one night, something happened. Caleb was fast asleep when he felt something warm press against his hand. Groggily, he opened his eyes and found Hiro standing by his bed, his body tense. Hiro, Caleb mumbled. What is it? Hiro whined softly and then turned toward the window. That's when Caleb heard it. A strange rustling sound outside. His heart began to pound. Slowly, he climbed out of bed and peeked out the window. In the dim moonlight, he could barely make out the shadow of a man moving near their fence. Caleb's breath caught. Hiro growled low, his fur standing on end. Caleb hurried to wake his mother. Within seconds, she was on the phone with the police while Hiro remained by the door, his body a shield between them and the unknown figure outside. Minutes later, flashing red and blue lights filled the night. Officers rushed in, and the man, caught mid-climb over their fence, was arrested. It turned out he had been trying to break into houses in the neighborhood, and Hiro had stopped him. The police praised Hiro's instincts, calling him a protector in every sense of the word. The next morning, news spread quickly. Hiro was already a legend, but now he was a hero twice over. Caleb hugged Hiro tightly. "You saved me again." Hiro licked his face, as if to say, "Always." The seasons changed, but one thing never did: Hiro's place in Caleb's life. The once stray dog who had been lost and alone had found a home, a family, and a purpose. Through storms, fears, and even danger, Hiro had never wavered. He wasn't just a pet. He wasn't just a dog. He was a guardian. And Caleb knew, as long as Hiro was by his side, he would always be safe. Because some heroes don't wear capes. Some heroes have paws. The days following Hiro's latest act of bravery were a whirlwind of excitement. The news of the attempted break-in and how Hiro had thwarted the burglar spread beyond their small town. Soon, newspapers, online articles, and even television stations picked up the story. Caleb's mom started receiving calls from various media outlets, all wanting to feature Hiro as a real-life guardian angel. At first, Caleb was a little overwhelmed by all the attention. He was just a regular kid, and Hiro was just his dog. But the way people reacted to Hiro's story made Caleb realize something. Hiro wasn't just his hero. He was a symbol of loyalty, protection, and unconditional love. One morning, Caleb's mom walked into the kitchen holding her phone, her expression stunned. "Caleb, you're not going to believe this," she said, sitting down at the table. Caleb, who had been sneaking Hiro a piece of bacon under the table, looked up curiously. "What is it?" he asked. She turned her phone around so he could see the email on the screen. It was from a national news station. They wanted to fly Caleb and Hiro to New York City for a live interview. Caleb's jaw dropped. "New York? Like, actual New York?" His mom nodded, still in shock herself. Hiro, sensing the excitement, wagged his tail, but Caleb could tell he had no idea what was going on. "But I've never been on a plane before," Caleb murmured. His mom smiled. "Well, looks like it's time for a new adventure." A week later, Caleb stood in the bustling airport, his backpack slung over his shoulders, Hiro sitting obediently beside him with a special service dog vest the airline had given him. People whispered as they passed by, some pointing, some taking photos. Hiro was becoming a celebrity. The flight itself was nerve-wracking, but Caleb had Hiro beside him the whole time. Anytime the plane hit turbulence, Hiro pressed his head against Caleb's leg, grounding him. By the time they landed in New York, Caleb realized something. He wasn't scared anymore, not as long as Hiro was with him. The next morning, they arrived at the news station. Bright lights, cameras, and a room filled with important-looking people made Caleb nervous. But Hiro, as always, remained calm, his presence giving Caleb courage. The interview started, and the host smiled warmly at Caleb. "So, Caleb, we've heard a lot about Hiro. Can you tell us, in your own words, what makes him special?" Caleb glanced at Hiro, who was sitting faithfully at his feet. "Hiro isn't just a dog," Caleb said. "He's my best friend. He saved me more times than I can count. When I was lost in the woods, he stayed with me all night. When someone tried to break into our house, he protected us. But even when nothing scary is happening, he's still there. He knows when I'm sad, when I need him, even when I don't say anything. I think some heroes don't need to wear capes. Some of them just have paws." The audience erupted in applause. Hiro wagged his tail happily. The host wiped at her eyes. "That's beautiful, Caleb. Truly beautiful." The rest of the interview flew by. Before they knew it, Caleb and Hiro were being showered with gifts. Treats, new toys, even an offer for Hiro to be in a commercial. Caleb politely declined the commercial, laughing as he told them, "Hiro doesn't care about being famous. He just wants belly rubs and peanut butter." The audience laughed. By the time they returned home, Hero was officially a national hero. Months passed, and things slowly went back to normal. But then, one crisp autumn evening, something extraordinary happened. Started as a knock on their front door. Caleb's mom opened it, expecting a neighbor, but instead, there was a woman standing there. She had a kind face, but her eyes were filled with emotion. "Hello," she said softly. I wanted to meet Hero." Caleb, who had been sitting on the couch, stood up and walked over, Hero following at his side. The woman knelt down, her eyes welling with tears as she looked at the dog. "I don't know if he remembers me," she said, her voice trembling, "but I think Hero used to be mine." Caleb's breath caught. She reached into her bag and pulled out a photo. It was a picture of Hero as a puppy. "I lost him during a terrible storm 2 years ago," she explained, her voice shaking. "I searched everywhere, put up posters, but I never found him. And then, I saw him on the news. I couldn't believe it." Caleb felt a lump in his throat. He looked down at Hero, searching his eyes. Would Hero want to go back? Would he leave? The woman wiped at her eyes. "I'm not here to take him from you," she added quickly. "I can see how much he loves you, how much you love him. I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for loving him, for giving him a home." Caleb felt his chest tighten with emotion. He knelt beside Hero, hugging him tightly. "Hero saved me," Caleb whispered. "I think we saved each other." The woman smiled, reaching out to stroke Hero's fur. Then he found exactly where he was meant to be. She stayed for a while, sharing stories about Hero's puppyhood, showing them pictures. Before she left, she handed Caleb something. A collar. "It was his when he was little," she said. "I think he'd want you to have it." Caleb held it carefully. That night, before bed, he fastened the collar around Hero's neck. Fit perfectly. Hero had once been lost, but now he was home, and he always would be.